The wind howls across the endless steppe, carrying with it the sound of hooves and the whisper of destiny. Among the scattered yurts of a struggling clan, a boy is born. His name is Temüjin. He is no different from the other children of the steppes, except for the fire that smolders in his eyes, a fire that hunger, betrayal, and exile will only make stronger. That boy, tempered by suffering and sharpened by survival, would one day rise to command the loyalty of nations and the fear of empires. His name would echo across centuries, Genghis Khan. Tonight we do not ride with him into battle, but step instead into the lesser, known chambers of his power, his palace, his wives and concubines, and the laws of the steppe that governed the most intimate corners of his life. This is the hidden world of the conqueror. The rise of Temüjin was anything but inevitable. As a child, he saw his father poisoned by rival Tatars and his family cast out, abandoned by their own kin. With no herd to sustain them, Temüjin, his mother Ilin, and his brothers survived by foraging in the wild. Hunger gnawed at them, enemies surrounded them, and even among his siblings there was conflict so bitter that blood was spilled. Yet from this crucible, Temüjin learned the harshest lesson of the steppe: loyalty is rare, but power comes to those who can command it. As he grew, Temüjin's charisma and ruthlessness drew followers. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds pledged themselves to him. He forged bonds not just through fear, but through trust, rewarding loyalty, punishing betrayal. Unlike other steppe chieftains who relied only on family ties, Temüjin elevated men based on merit, a revolutionary idea that turned former outcasts into loyal generals. By uniting scattered clans, he set the foundations of an empire, one that would soon stretch from the shores of the Pacific to the gates of Europe. But even as he conquered, he understood the need for something greater than the sword alone. A Khan was not merely a warrior. He was the axis of an entire people, a ruler who had to embody justice, strength, and divine favor. To be that ruler, Temüjin needed not only armies but a court, not only battlefields but a palace. And so the story of his domestic power begins. Unlike the marble palaces of Europe or the gilded courts of China, the palace of Genghis Khan was born of the steppe. At first, it was not a city of stone, but a vast encampment of yurts, mobile, adaptable, always ready to move with the herds and the armies. Yet, as victories piled up and his realm expanded, Temüjin, now Genghis Khan, realized the need for a fixed capital. That place was Karakorum. Karakorum was more than a seat of power, it was a symbol. Situated in the Orkhon Valley, at the heart of the Mongol homeland, the city became a crossroads of cultures. From China came silks and scholars, from Persia came artisans and traders, from the Muslim world came astronomers and physicians. Within its walls stood Buddhist temples, Muslim mosques, and even an Nestorian Christian church, all tolerated under the Khan's decree. For a man who ruled by force, Genghis Khan also understood the value of inclusion. The palace itself reflected this diversity. Chinese craftsmen decorated its halls, Persian scribes recorded its decrees, and Turkic guards stood at its gates. Yet no palace is complete without those who share the ruler's private life. The harem of Genghis Khan was both a sanctuary and a tool of politics. His first and most important wife was Burati, the woman he married as a young man. Buret was more than a consort. She was a partner in strategy and legitimacy. When she was kidnapped by the rival Merkit tribe and later rescued by Temüjin, the episode burned itself into his memory, shaping his relentless pursuit of vengeance and power. Burati's sons, Jachi, Chagatai, Ugadi, and Tolui would form the backbone of the imperial lineage. But Buret was not alone. Genghis Khan, like many rulers of his age, took multiple wives and concubines, often as part of political alliances. A conquered tribe might offer its daughter to the Khan as a gesture of submission. Each new wife strengthened bonds, sealed treaties, and sometimes fueled rivalries within the palace walls. The harem was not merely a place of pleasure, it was a battlefield of influence. Women in the Mongol court could wield quiet but immense power, advising their husbands, protecting their sons, and occasionally ruling in their own right when men were away at war. Despite the growing wealth and the cosmopolitan nature of Karakorum, Genghis Khan never abandoned the laws of the steppe, the Yasa. This code governed everything from military discipline to trade, from theft to marriage. Within the palace, it dictated the order of precedence among wives, the duties of servants, and the punishments for betrayal. The Yasa was harsh, but it was also the glue that held together an empire of many nations and faiths. Even in the most intimate chambers of the Khan, the law of the steppe prevailed. Imagine the scene: a hall where Persian merchants present gifts of fine carpets, Chinese scholars debate astronomy, and Mongol generals kneel before their Khan to receive orders. Behind these public displays, the harem hums with quiet intensity. Alliances whispered, rivalries simmering, and the future of the empire shaped not only by battles on the frontier, but by the choices made within those walls. The palace of Genghis Khan was not like Versailles or the Forbidden City. It was simpler, more austere, yet no less powerful in its symbolism. Here was a ruler who had risen from hunger and exile to command the greatest empire the world had yet seen. His palace was not built to dazzle with gold, but to remind all who entered that from the windswept steppe had come a man who bent nations to his will. And yet, as the empire expanded, so too did the complexities of ruling. How could a man who once slept on the bare ground beneath the stars now govern millions of subjects across continents? How did the laws of the steppe adapt to the luxuries of Persia and the philosophies of China? And how did the women of his court, often overlooked by history, shape the destiny of a realm that would stretch farther than even Rome or Alexander had dreamed? These questions lead us deeper into the hidden life of Genghis Khan, beyond the roar of battle, and into the silence of the palace chambers, where whispers could change the course of history just as surely as armies on the march. Life inside the palace of Genghis Khan was not simply a matter of luxury. It was a place where survival, politics, and tradition were woven into the very fabric of daily existence. While the Khan's generals carried his banners across deserts and mountains, the palace in Karakorum became the heartbeat of an empire, a stage where rituals reinforced authority and private intrigues shaped the future. Each day began with the rhythms of the steppe. Even in the heart of Karakorum, the smell of smoke from burning dung and wood fires filled the air as servants tended to the yurts and halls. Horses, the lifeblood of the Mongols, were tethered nearby, their presence a reminder that the Khan himself, despite commanding the largest empire in history, remained a son of the steppe. At dawn, reports arrived from distant lands. Letters written by Chinese scribes, sealed with the marks of Persian traders, or carried by riders who had galloped hundreds of miles across the grasslands. Genghis Khan demanded discipline not only on the battlefield, but also within his household. The Yasa Code governed the smallest details of life. Theft was punished severely, adultery carried dire consequences, and disputes among servants could not be left to fester. Order had to be maintained, for the palace was not simply a home, it was the center of an empire that relied on respect for authority. Ceremonies played a crucial role in reinforcing that authority. When foreign envoys arrived, they were led into the Khan's presence with great care. Imagine the scene: ambassadors from the Song dynasty of China, clad in silks, kneeling before a man whose garments were simple but whose gaze carried the weight of conquest. They presented gifts: fine porcelain, golden vessels, bolts of cloth. Genghis Khan listened through interpreters, his silence often more intimidating than words. At his side might sit one of his wives, sometimes Buret herself, whose presence reminded all that the Khan's family was inseparable from his power. The women of the Mongol court were far from passive figures. Buret, as first wife, held unmatched authority, overseeing the other wives and concubines, managing household affairs, and influencing the Khan's decisions. But she was not alone. Each wife commanded her own ordo, a separate household complete with servants, guards, and herds. When the Khan rode out on campaign, these women often managed entire sectors of the empire. In their hands rested the safety of the treasury, the welfare of the people, and even the training of the Khan's sons. Among those sons, rivalries simmered. Jochi, the eldest, bore the shadow of doubt over his paternity due to Buret's abduction years earlier, and though Genghis Khan never disowned him, tension with his brothers Chagatai, Yagediye, and Tolui was constant. Within the palace, these rivalries played out in whispered conversations, in alliances forged with certain wives or advisors, in the subtle maneuvering that could decide succession. To rule the Mongol Empire was to master not only the battlefield, but also the delicate balance of family politics. The concubines of the palace added further layers of complexity. Many were daughters of noble families offered in submission, others were women captured in conquest. Some became trusted companions, others pawns in larger political games. Yet their influence could be profound. A concubine who bore a son might suddenly find herself elevated, her household expanded, her voice amplified in palace affairs. These women carried stories from distant lands, Chinese poetry, Persian songs, Turkic traditions, infusing the palace with cultural richness that mirrored the diversity of the empire itself. Life was not all intrigue and ceremony. There were moments of leisure and festivity. The Mongols loved feasts, and the Khan's palace echoed with the sounds of music and laughter during celebrations. Dishes of roasted mutton, fermented mare's milk called arag, and delicacies from conquered lands filled long tables. Musicians played instruments brought from every corner of the empire, the haunting melodies of the Maureen Kur from Mongolia, the lutes of Persia, the flutes of China. Storytellers recited epics by firelight, while dancers performed before the Khan and his court. These moments of joy, though fleeting, reminded all that the empire was not built only on war, but also on the sharing of culture. Yet beneath the merriment, the weight of empire was never absent. Every decision made in the palace had repercussions thousands of miles away. A treaty signed in Karakorum might secure peace in Central Asia. A quarrel among brothers might ignite civil war. Even the order in which wives or sons were seated at a feast carried symbolic meaning, hinting at succession or favoritism. For those who lived within the palace walls, nothing was trivial. The presence of foreign advisors further complicated the scene. Persian administrators taught the Mongols the art of tax collection and record keeping. Chinese engineers introduced new methods of construction and warfare. Muslim scholars debated astronomy and medicine. Genghis Khan, though illiterate, valued knowledge and surrounded himself with those who possessed it. Within his palace, ideas crossed borders just as armies did, forging a world empire not only of conquest but of exchange. Despite this cosmopolitan atmosphere, Genghis Khan never allowed himself or his court to grow soft. He reminded his children and his wives of their origins. He warned them that the empire was built not on silk or gold, but on discipline and fear. At times, he even returned to the open steppe, preferring a yurt to the comforts of stone halls, reminding all who followed him that he remained the same man who once survived on roots and scraps. And so the palace of Genghis Khan stood as both a paradox and a symbol. It was a place of luxury, yet ruled by the harsh laws of the steppe, a gathering of cultures, yet bound by the authority of one man, a space of intimacy where women whispered secrets that could shape dynasties, and a stage of ceremony where ambassadors from across the known world bowed to the conqueror of nations. Here, more than anywhere else, the empire revealed its true nature, fragile, diverse, and entirely dependent on the will of a single Khan. The walls of Karakorum held not only treasures and prisoners, but also the ambitions of sons, the influence of wives, and the weight of a legacy that would outlive Genghis Khan himself. The empire was vast, the armies unstoppable, but in the quiet corridors of the palace, the future was being written, not with swords, but with whispers, rivalries, and the laws of family. The final years of Genghis Khan's life were marked not by decline, but by relentless ambition. Even as age bent his shoulders and gray streaked his hair, his hunger for conquest did not fade. He led campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire, punishing its Shah for treachery, and drove his armies deep into Persia, Central Asia, and even toward the Caspian Sea. Yet behind the clash of armies, the palace remained the constant heart of his rule, a place where plans were drawn, hairs were weighed, and the legacy of an empire was quietly forged. Within the palace walls, the question of succession loomed ever larger. Genghis Khan had 4 sons by Biri, each ambitious, each strong, and each with their own supporters. Jachi, the eldest, was a skilled commander, but whispers about his legitimacy never ceased to haunt him. Chagatai, fierce and hot-tempered, openly opposed his brother's claim. Ugidi, diplomatic and measured, emerged as a compromise candidate, while Tolui, the youngest, was favored for his loyalty and military brilliance. The palace became a theater where this drama unfolded. Every banquet, every council, every gesture of the Khan offering hints of his eventual choice. Genghis Khan, for all his power, understood that the strength of the empire depended not only on conquest, but on stability after his death. He convened a Kurultai, a grand council of Mongol nobles and generals, to discuss the matter. In these gatherings, the palace was transformed into a forum where voices from across the empire debated succession. In the end, it was Ugidi who was chosen, a decision that reflected Genghis Khan's pragmatism. He knew that compromise, not favoritism, would keep the fragile unity of the empire intact. Even in his final campaigns, the Khan never fully detached himself from the domestic affairs of his court. He summoned his wives and sons to advise him, reminding them of the yasa, the laws of the steppe that bound even the highest, born to discipline. He warned them against luxury, against forgetting the hardships that had made the Mongols strong. In his eyes, the palace was not a place to grow soft, but a citadel from which to project the harsh strength of the steppes. His death, in 1227 during a campaign against the Western Shah dynasty was shrouded in mystery. Some say he fell from his horse, others whisper of wounds or illness. What is certain is that his passing was kept secret until the conquest was complete. His body, legend tells, was returned to Mongolia and buried in an unmarked grave guarded by secrecy so deep that its location remains unknown to this day. Yet while his physical body vanished into the earth, his palace and his dynasty carried his spirit forward. After Genghis Khan, the palace of Karakorum grew even more significant. Under Ugidi, it became the administrative hub of a world empire, a place where edicts were issued that reached from Korea to Hungary. Stone buildings rose beside yurts, markets flourished, and artisans from every corner of the empire filled its streets. The palace became a meeting point not just for warriors and envoys, but for ideas, technologies, and religions. It was here that the Mongols began to shift from conquerors into rulers, adapting the cultures they had subdued into a system of governance that allowed the empire to endure. Yet the seeds of division were also planted within those same walls. The rivalries among Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons did not vanish with his death. Feasts turned into forums of argument, and alliances between wives and concubines fueled factional struggles. Some sought power through marriage, others through the loyalty of generals. The palace remained a place of unity in appearance, but of competition in truth, mirroring the empire itself. Vast, powerful, but always fragile. Still, the influence of the women of the court persisted. Bu Right, though aged, remained a respected matriarch until her death. Later, women like Sorgaitani Beki, the wife of Tolui, would guide the destinies of their sons, ensuring that future Khans ruled with wisdom and strength. Sorgaitani, in particular, became one of the most powerful figures of the 13th century, using her position within the palace to educate her children and secure their places as rulers of great khanates. In many ways, the legacy of Genghis Khan's empire owed as much to the women of the palace as to the warriors on the field. The palace also became a center of diplomacy. Envoys from Europe arrived, bringing letters from kings and popes who sought either alliance or protection. Muslim merchants negotiated trade rights, while Chinese officials advised on taxation and administration. Karakorum became a city of the world, a place where the dreams of an empire were negotiated not only by sword and arrow, but by words and treaties. And yet, for all its growing complexity, the palace never lost its connection to the steppe. Even in halls decorated by foreign craftsmen, the Khans insisted on maintaining the traditions of their ancestors. Horses grazed within sight of the city, yurts stood alongside palaces of stone, and rituals of the open steppe, such as the sharing of arag, fermented mare's milk, remained central to court life. The Mongols, no matter how far their empire stretched, never forgot the windswept plains from which they came. In the centuries that followed, the empire fractured, as all great empires eventually do. Yet the memory of Genghis Khan's palace endured, not as a monument of stone, but as a symbol of transformation. It was in that palace that a boy who had once starved in exile became a ruler of the world. It was in that palace that the laws of the steppe were codified into the governance of nations. It was in that palace that women shaped dynasties, sons quarreled over succession, and cultures intertwined to create something entirely new. The story of Genghis Khan's palace is, in the end, the story of empire itself, born in hardship, grown through conquest, held together by fragile bonds of loyalty and law, and destined to leave a mark on history far greater than its walls. From the silence of its chambers emerged decisions that altered the fate of continents. From its feasts and councils rose dynasties that ruled from China to Persia. And from its hidden corners, where whispers carried as much weight as swords, the future of half the world was shaped. Today, the stones of Karakorum lie scattered, the palace long vanished into dust. But if you listen to the wind across the Mongolian steppe, you may still hear it, the echo of hooves, the murmur of voices in council, the laughter of feasts, and the unyielding command of a man who rose from nothing to rule the world. This was the palace of Genghis Khan. More than a home, more than a court, it was the heart of an empire, and its legacy still beats within the pages of history.